This might be the easiest technique I could possibly ever teach you, but I'm going to put it top 3 for single technique with the biggest potential impact on your landscape photography. When I first discovered it, I felt like my image quality doubled overnight. But while it's so easy that a complete Photoshop beginner could do it, it only works when you understand why and where to use it on your photos. So in this video, I'm showing you what this amazing technique is, the steps to do it in Photoshop, and more importantly, when and how to use it to give your landscapes a unique, naturally stunning appearance. First, it's important to understand why it works so well, and it's because it taps into a natural phenomenon that happens in virtually every landscape scene. Take a look at this photo, for example. The foreground is clear and has lots of contrast, and as you go off into the distance, it gets a bit more hazy the further you go, until right off in the background, it's so hazy that when I sample this darkest shadow color, you can see it's hardly a shadow at all. Here's the thing though, I see so many people make this mistake, and it's something I used to do too, so no judgment here, but that mistake is to eliminate this natural haziness under the illusion that the background must be rich and full of contrast if the photo is going to pop. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because this haze gives the scene atmospheric perspective, or in other words, it's what makes far away things look far away. Because particles in the air reflect light, the more air between you and the subject, the more light gets reflected. To help visualize this concept, here's me, and let's say it's sunset, so all the air particles are reflecting the warm colors of the low sun, essentially coloring the air. And we can represent that with this gradient, so the further away that I look, the more of this colored air I'm looking through. Now let's assume that there's no air at all and we're in a vacuum, and there are these 3 mountains all made of the same stuff, so they look identical right now. But watch what happens when we put the colored air back in. So here's an extreme example where this happens naturally, and you can see with each distant layer it gets more hazy until right in the very distance the mountains are little more than a silhouette. And the worst thing you could do when editing this image is reduce the haze, because then you're going to lose all that atmospheric perspective that enhances the depth and 3-dimensionality in the scene. Now you know what not to do, i.e. don't remove haze and kill the atmospheric perspective in a scene. Let me now show you the stupidly simple technique to enhance atmospheric perspective, or even add it when there's very little happening naturally. There's really only a couple of steps to it, but the real power, like I said a minute ago, is in how you use the technique. So I'll show you 2 ways to supercharge it next. But first, here's how to do it. Begin by adding a new empty layer to your image in Photoshop. Then grab the brush tool on these settings. Hold Alt or Option on the keyboard and sample a light color from the sky. Or if it's not a bright image, then sample the brightest area and then increase the brightness of the sample, like this. And then literally all you have to do is paint light or haze into those distant areas. Now it looks pretty good in some images just on its own like this, but it will look too obvious in others. So let me show you the first way to make this technique work even better. It involves luminosity masking, and I've got plenty of videos on my channel that show you how to do it manually without a plugin, but for speed I'm going to demonstrate using my free plugin, which you can download from the link in the description or pinned comment. Now for this tip, the goal is to restrict the effect to the image highlights. So first, choose a particular highlights range from 1 to 5 in the bar up here, probably a 1 in most cases, and you might actually find it works better if you hide the hazy layer before making the selection, in which case turn the layer off, make your selection with the plugin, and then turn the layer back on again. And then all you need to do is simply add a new layer mask to your hazy layer, and hey presto, the effect is restricted just to the highlights because of this layer mask. And you can see the difference it makes and how much more natural the haziness looks now that it's blended in. Now, the second way to supercharge this atmospheric perspective technique is to use it to create separation between different elements in your photos to make them pop more. So it's not just to make distant things look distant. This time it's to paint haze in at different levels to make things stand out against the things that are behind them, like this example. So these rocks out at sea are a similar brightness to the water, and they don't really stand out as well as they could. So let me first sample a light color that mimics the existing haze in the distance of the image, and I'll actually make it a bit lighter. Then I'm just going to paint a massive sweeping blob of haze across here. Now that looks pretty good, so all we need to do now is just mask it out from these rocks. So the object selection tool is going to do a good job here because we actually have some hard edges to work with. The kind of selection you need to make is going to depend on your image. Sometimes a luminosity mask will be best, in which case you can use my free plugin to help with that. Other times, like this, you can just use the object selection tool. But either way, now I have that selection, I can use a black brush in the layer mask to remove the hazy effect from the rocks, brushing through the selection like a stencil to keep it within the bounds of the rocks. And now, just to blend this in a little bit more at the bottom, I'm going to deselect the selection and do a bit more brushing. And now check this out when we compare the before and after versions. The rocks in the after version pop and stand out from their background more than before, and it looks natural because we're using fake, or let's say enhanced, atmospheric perspective to do the heavy lifting. Now this is a great technique, but it won't count for anything if other editing techniques are letting your images down. So watch this next video to discover a Photoshop hack that you can use to achieve high quality edits every time.